Hello, and welcome to Lessons My Patients Taught Me. This is your host, Dr. Elliot Davidson, Family Doctor. I'm doing today our fifth video podcast from my home base in Solon, Ohio. This is podcast number 75, and in this podcast, we talk about lessons that my distinguished guests and I have learned from our patients over our many years in practice. This podcast is going to break some new ground on several fronts. First, this is our first international podcast, as my guest today is in Dublin, Ireland. Second, my guest is not exactly a health professional, although he's doing some very important health-related work that may impact many of your professional and personal lives in the near future. My guest today is Eric Mangiardi, the CEO of Q3 Medical Devices Limited, and I think you're going to find the things he has to say very interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about Eric. Eric Mangiardi received his Bachelor's of Science in Marketing and Finance at the University of Dayton and his Master's of Science in International Marketing at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. He's had a remarkable career in finance and marketing and has been the CEO of several companies. He's visited over 40 countries and holds over 40 approved or pending patents for medical devices. His present company, Q3 Medical Devices Limited, employs over 200 professionals, and they're focused on the design, the development, and manufacture, and the global marketing of interventional devices in cardiology, peripheral vascular disease, interventional radiology, as well as non-vascular applications with a focus on bioresorbable, microinvasive, and drug delivery technologies that reduce cost, improve outcomes, improve patient quality of life, and impact sustainability. It sounds like he and his team are out to accomplish the triple aim all by themselves. Eric, I am so happy to have you join us on the podcast today.
Really appreciate being here, Elliot.
So let's just start off with a general question. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get interested in marketing and finance, and how did you make the great leap to medical devices?
That's a long story and a short question, that's for sure. But, just about myself, I'm from Buffalo, New York originally. Grew up in the great state of New York, and certainly the best city in the state being Buffalo, home of the Buffalo Bills, and as we say, always in the Bills Mafia, go Buffalo. So I want to make sure I get that out there in the podcast. I went to a small school called St. Francis in Buffalo, New York, in Athol Springs. Actually, it's an all-boys school there, and I would say that that was a genesis of my real desire to go to college and university and do something more. And then, I think in the university setting, I went to the University of Dayton in Ohio. And at the University of Dayton, I studied marketing and finance, and that was kind of the beginning of a good foundation, I think, to go forward with. And after my time in Dayton, I started playing a bit of rugby. And my love for rugby caused me to quit my job as a medical device director with a company called US Surgical and move over to Glasgow, Scotland to play rugby more full time.
Wow.
And that was a great experience. And during that time, I picked up a master's degree in international marketing. Because I didn't really have a way to explain to people why I was quitting my job to go play rugby overseas. And this became a reason to basically suggest that I was going overseas to get an additional degree. And I needed that degree to kind of compete globally, where at least I wanted to compete in corporate America. And during that process of capturing my degree, as I say, I met my wife, and this is 25 years later, here we are. And now I'm involved in this wonderful medical device business, and that in and of itself is a really long story on the medical device side, is because this is my second medical device company. I'd say I honed my skills in med tech really with a company called US Surgical for a number of years. And then I started a company called Avilis. And the Avilis name is simply the smallest air sac in the lungs. And I got involved with that business primarily because, I watched my grandfather die of lung cancer, a post-obstructive issue after a pneumonectomy to remove the cancer. He died on Christmas Eve. And it was, but these are the things in life that are really interesting, right? Because they either drive you or they kind of smash you. And in this particular case, it was really a driver. And I had a friend named John Hickey who introduced me to this interventional pulmonologist, Gerard Silvestri. And it was a great introduction. And They told me about this opportunity to maybe kind of bring out a new interventional pulmonology stent, right? And I knew nothing about, getting a product approved. I was actually working for a software company at the time. And I thought, this could be really interesting because what I could do is I could use part of my master's thesis on the high rate of failures of international M&A with this expectations theory that I had kind of built out in terms of expectations equal negotiations to these varying degrees. And I said, if I got to the analysis stage and it looked like it was interesting, then I would quit my job and I would essentially go forward, with this new endeavor. And after I really did the analysis over the first 6 months, let's call it, I really thought that there was a real opportunity to build a market for these interventional pulmonology stents. And I decided to quit my job and start a new company and begin this process around building technology in that area. And that was really my first foray into my own medical device initiatives with some other partners. And my history around medical devices, I would say my love for medical devices probably was a bit of a genesis off of having, aneurysm when I was very young. When I was about 14, I had a right internal carotid aneurysm, and they call
Wow.
it's a series 7 aneurysm, they call it, but it's essentially was a fusiform aneurysm, so it was in the middle of the vessel before it created this big cavernous space. And it ended up being that there was a couple of doctors that were extremely innovative in the world, and one of them was based in London, Ontario, in Canada, this Dr. Drake. And this was one of the only institutions that were really willing to have a conversation with me about treating me without having to do a craniotomy, which creates all other problems and potential complications. And, everything worked out fine in this long, undulating story around my treatment, but I think that that really gave me this love for med tech. And I tell people today that, this kind of drew me into these different spaces I'm at, like with US Surgical, I was interested in that space. And then to do my own, first startup in the med tech space, I thought about it back as, innovation is a real key to really future opportunities to help a bunch of people. And that really kinda led me into that space.
Oh, that's very interesting how these profound life events kind of change your direction sometimes. And also, us in medicine, we like to help people, but we also see there's multiple different ways to help people. And certainly in med tech and running a company is another way to do that. Tell us about your company. What are your major products and who is using them and how are they working?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Elliot, I think the company itself, Q3 Medical, the Q is the greatest inventor of all time in James Bond, and it's very interesting because I tell people that if it's a young audience, they're all scratching their heads trying to figure out how Q is, and that makes me really begin to date myself. But,
I remember
that's
Q.
yeah, yeah. And then 3 is just about thinking 3 levels deep in any problem or question, and if you do that, the idea is that 80% of the time you get the answer correct, and if we do that as a company, as a whole, as a collective group, we really have this great opportunity to do something special. And in this organization that we have, there's roughly 150 different people in the company, but there's roughly 30 different countries represented, all kinds of different languages, et cetera, different cultures. And we try to create something that would help unify that group to kind of harness their expertise.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about what you're doing.
Yeah, so what we did was with Q3, we decided to try to begin to build the world's first vertically integrated biodegradable implant company. There's been a number of companies in this space that large multinationals included that have spent billions of dollars. We say trying to kind of crack the case, if you will, on figuring out how to actually make a biodegradable implant that's effective and works. We decided some time ago, at least I did, back when I exited my last business, I thought, what else could I do? And literally, my wife told me to go clean the garage, and it's definitely a garage story. She told me to go clean the garage, and while cleaning the garage, I I simply looked at a drill bit that my grandfather had given me, and that gave me this epiphany about, kind of building a biodegradable implant for the hepatopancreatic biliary space. My grandmother died of pancreatic cancer. I thought, what a great way to maybe eulogize her. And the way to build a device was, kind of based on this design of this helix. And I went up that night and I patented this device. And fast forward, I got invited to become a partner in this German-based manufacturing company that I had previously worked with, and they were a supplier in my last business. And I thought, I might as well give it a shot. My wife is Spanish and she wanted to go back to Europe to be closer to her dad. So in life, that's kind of how everything works. It kind of undulates you and pushes you into the right direction no matter what. And so we decided to make a run for it and build this vertically integrated biodegradable implant company. And here we are. We fast forward today, we've got 5 biodegradable implants approved. We have approval in the U.S., so we're cleared in the U.S., and we've just started commercialization in the U.S. And when we talk about the markets for the opportunity, we maybe break them up into the European market and then, break them up maybe the U.S. market. So first, Europe and all of the countries that impacts. You know, I would say in the UK, for example, the largest centers are all using the devices, whether that's Cambridge, King's, UCL, etc. There's really a whole host of these universities using these devices that would be well known. And you're starting to see this uptick in utility of the devices throughout Europe, and all of 5 of the devices are approved currently in Europe. In the US, it took me 7 years, with the help of everybody in the company to get the device cleared by the FDA. So we have maybe 40,000 implants globally with the devices, and we just had clearance in the US in July. Since that time period, we're up and running in 10 centers. We've got another 40 centers we're in process in. We're really focused in on these large integrated delivery networks where you're focusing on the flagship hospital. And then after you get into the flagship hospital, you're able to then use the devices in all the other hospitals. And they would be at some great places like Hopkins, like Georgetown, like University of Florida, Shands, like the Orlando healthcare system with Advent Health. So there's some University of Iowa, University of Chicago, Illinois, University of California, San Francisco, the guys down at Cleveland Clinic in Florida. So some really well-known hospital brands are using the devices, and you're starting to see more and more kind of come out about the technology in the U.S. And so we're really excited about what's happening with the business right now.
Now, I don't know how much you can share with our audience, but can you describe the devices in a little more detail? Start with a hepatobiliary one. How does it work? How does it used? Give an example on a real patient.
Sure. I think that the wonderful thing about the devices is I don't have to retrain the doctors. So the doctors use these devices exactly like they use the current plastic or metal implants, right? They don't have to change anything about what they're doing. The only difference is they don't have to bring the patient back. And there tends to be a lot less complications when you use the device. So one of the major areas of use is in the area of endoscopy. So you have problems with your liver or your pancreas or your biliary system, right? The doctors go in and they treat these different issues or diseases or indications with endoscopy, which is a scope that they place through your mouth into your esophagus and into your stomach to give them access to these other areas or these other organs. And they use these little guide wires to get up inside these ducts, right, that you have your bile or your pancreatic fluid flowing from. And they've historically used plastic devices or metal devices that all have their inherent problems, to treat these different diseases or to prevent future issues associated with these procedures. And so we simply made a biodegradable implant that is a different design. It's more like a helical drill bit, and it has dual drainage, so it drains through the middle as well as through the outside of the helix. Prevents reocclusion, right, of these, like you have with these plastic stents, so that you can maintain that bile flow during the period of time that you need to treat the disease. And it also prevents the side branch blockage because you have these different side branches, like in your pancreas, for example, that flow to the main ducts, right? And normally with a plastic stent, it's a solid straw. And it blocks these side branches and has a higher potential for causing pancreatitis or reoccluding as high as 30 or 40%, based on the American Society of Gastroenterology standards. And so we made a device that obviates those issues, but also eliminates the need for these people to come back for a removal procedure. So by doing that, you hopefully increase patient quality of life because they eliminate a surgery. You reduce costs significantly because I eliminate surgery and complications. I improve hospital efficiencies because now these physicians or the staff, right, they're able to treat more complex diseases versus having to retrieve a plastic stent or pull that out. And by doing those things, I eliminate a bunch of waste.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm just curious, how long do these stents last and do they completely dissolve?
Yeah, they completely dissolve. And in the US, we only have the fast absorbing version. Right now, that's what's cleared in the US, but in the rest of the world, we have a fast, we have a medium, and we have a slow version. So the fast one goes away in 2 weeks, the medium in a month, and the slow version in 3 months. And the reason for that is when we did the research in the literature, you really identified that there were a lot of latent complications associated with these device implants. And if you match a device that matches the disease state, meaning the time it is needed to treat the disease, you eliminate all these latent complications. And by doing that, you naturally improve patient quality of life, reduce costs, improve efficiencies, and eliminate waste. And so that's why we built, when we first launched the device, 3 separate devices.
Yeah. Now, you described the one that's in the hepatobiliary system. You said there's 5 different devices. What are the other 4? Where do they work?
Yeah, well, those are actually 3 separate devices, like the fast, the medium, and the slow. So they're totally different materials. They require totally different production processes. And in many of the cases, they're required to have different approval processes. So they're really 3 separate devices. And the beauty of them is that, they're all embedded with barium so that I can see them under fluoroscopy or imaging, just like you can see the current devices. The other devices are really geared around a magnesium alloy that we invented. Like, this is what's kind of cool, I think, cool about what we're doing. We're inventing new materials.
This is why you have 40 patents because you're doing a lot of new stuff.
Wait, so that part is really exciting, honestly, and that I think that we have a real opportunity here to kind of change this whole treatment algorithm for these patients and make it less complex and more efficient. And with this magnesium alloy, it's brilliant. It's the same. You have Archimedes that replaces these plastic stents that look like small straws, right? And the Unity device, it's a magnesium alloy material that if I put it in your hand, like, it feels like a metal. And the whole idea is that you laser cut a stent design into it so that you balloon mount it, you crimp it down on top of a balloon catheter, and the doctors deliver it just like they deliver a normal stent. Right, and so what happens is
So
that they put it in place and they balloon it up and they hold it in place for a little bit, and then they take the balloon down and they remove the balloon, and that stent stays in like an architecture, almost like an internal cast versus an external cast like you might have on your hand.
yeah, so do you have devices that have vascular usage now?
No, no, we don't do vascular now, although we've done quite a bit of animal work in cardiology and peripheral vascular. We believe there's a real opportunity to do vascular work, but right now we're really focused in on the hepatopancreatic biliary space and then moving into urology after that. We think that there's a great opportunity to utilize our skills and technology. Right now it's being used in endoscopy for sure, used by interventional radiologists to treat benign biliary strictures, used by surgeons at the time of surgery to prevent these complications from occurring. And what we found was that after a complication occurs, There's this real interest to use the Archimedes device, which is the one that replaces plastic stents, or the Unity device, the one that replaces metal stents, to use those devices to address these complications. For us, we've now started to move into this area of renal transplants, right? And that's kind of our first foray into moving into urology. You have the same issue in urology, except instead of having 3 million plastic stents used a year in the HPV space, you maybe have 6 or 8 million used in the urology space, all with the same issues. They encrust, they block, they reocclude, and you have to go back in and remove them. And so our strategy is to make sure we have full utility of the devices in these real complex patients that requires stenting either at the time of renal transplantation or after, when there's a complication, so that the doctors can use our devices to address both, to prevent, and then also when there is a complication, to address that complication.
I see. I mean, you got plenty of patient needs in the hepatobiliary space and the urology space, and I see the vascular space would be a little more challenging because they want those to stay open forever, and so there may be some additional challenges there. This podcast is about lessons we've learned from our patients. I wonder if you can share any lessons that you've learned or that your doctors have learned about, these devices or these approaches with any specific patients that you've heard about.
Yeah, I would tell you this as well. It's just something important to recognize. A lot of these patients have these internal external biliary drains, and that's the standard of care as well, besides plastic stenting, meaning they have, for benign biliary disease, they have drains sticking out their sides, right? Draining into a bag. It more than is about survival, because if you don't have that external drain, you really have major healthcare issues. And what we found is that it's been great because doctors are really pushing the envelope on our capabilities as well, because they need something more to treat these patients. So imagine a child, right? In this particular case, I want to say that this particular patient was in the UK, and there was a dance, and this young person had an external biliary drain, and those external biliary drains, they get infected, they have an odor, right? I think that everybody would recognize that you would have one, even though you're hiding it under your shirt. And this young man wanted to go to a dance without the drain, right? And the doctor offered up this option of using the Unity device to eliminate those particular drains. The Unity device replaces these metal stents, and it's that alloy that we invented. And they implanted this device into this young man so that he would be able to remove the drain and be able to go to this dance unencumbered, as well as to treat the benign disease. Right, and this is material for this young man, that he gets to go out in the same way, in the same environment that his classmates get to go out and participate, right? And in a dance,
And
right?
be a normal
Unencumbered,
kid, right? Be a
right,
normal kid.
right.
Yeah, so
And
that's
that's the big thing, Elliot. Nobody's going to develop technology for children. And this is what people don't really realize, is that it rarely gets done. In this particular case, you know, we're really developing a technology with total utility, and we hope that the device is used in areas where we can really benefit a wider patient population. This would be one thing. I never realized that infants or young adolescent kids had transplants, liver transplants. And I'm really ashamed to say that, because I'm fairly well versed in the med tech sector. And when I started doing this, I didn't realize that these kids, as low as like 5 kilos, 6 kilos, were having liver transplants at a very early age. So think about this, right? I'm a parent. I'm with my spouse, who I'm in love with, and I decide that I want to have a child with that person. Right, we go and we have a child with all of the hope, right, in the world behind us, that everything is gonna be great and we're gonna have this wonderful life and everything is gonna work out perfectly, right? And then they have a baby, and I can't imagine, I can empathize, but I can't imagine the real feeling that you have when you have a child, that has these complications. And what I found was that that in all of these types of complications or issues, there's been a desire or need to try to treat those patients. And we have a doctor from Guadalajara, Mexico, that's put in 30 of the devices in pediatrics, really young kids, as a way to treat those kids, to give them a time to kind of grow out of their issues. Because the kids are growing so fast in many of the cases. When they grow and they get older, there's issues of these, after the transplants, of these strictures, right, that kind of reocclude, they go away. And I'm just amazed at what these doctors are doing around the world globally using these devices, or we're preventing, there's leaks that occur from these surgical procedures, and they're going in with the device, endoscopically, or, the interventional radiologists are going percutaneously through the skin, using the devices to treat these leaks. I didn't imagine all of this utility for these devices. That wasn't what I envisioned. I was just wanting to do something really for pancreatic cancer, and to try to do something more to eulogize my grandmother. And then, the rest of the world is kind of
That's incredible. Now, I think you can be properly described as a visionary, but I'm curious to see what new areas are you looking into for these devices? You've already described a lot of things they're doing, a lot of things that you hope to be doing. Where do you think this is going? The applicability seems to be very broad here.
Yeah, I think that when we think about this internally, openly, we're thinking about diseases that we have family members that have succumbed to, really, and that's how we're thinking about using or leveraging our skill sets. I tried, I really, whether it's an investor, a private equity group, a large multinational, I tried to explain it to them just like this, right? This isn't, there is no venture funding in the business. It's all self-funded, with all the risk that goes along with that, right? With all the other issues, you have no backing, you have no real money to manage the risk, right? And we're kind of on the other side of the river now, and we're getting the company to profitability. We've got great partners, great investors, different doctors that have come forward wanting to invest, different other partners that have wanted to, all individuals, and it's nothing material. When we speak about, it's never 50, 60, 70 million that everybody's raising. So we've really done this on our own backs, which is a great thing. And what we think is that, because we've done that, we've been able to identify a broader vision that you can't if you're a venture funded company. Because when you're venture funded, you're singular and focused, get the product out the door, make sure it does what it's supposed to do, sell it to a multinational, right? That's a different vision. Our vision is simply to create wide utility. So we think for sure that there's these wide applications in urology, right? For the reasons I spoke about before, replacing plastic, anywhere you have a removal and high complications, and you have a low quality of life for the patients, and you have a lot of waste, we're focused in on those areas. So we love areas where you have to remove something. So we think urology is a big area for us. The other area is prostate. We really believe that there's not enough done in the area of prostate. There's a number of things that are done to obliterate the prostate, but there's not enough done to address the complications that are associated with that, such as prolapse. And we think that, different things like our Unity device has a great application to be placed in the prostate to hold the urethra open during the healing period, right? So that they don't have to have a catheter. Simple inconveniences that cause complications are really what we want to avoid. The other area is my partner, Monford Gulcher, right? He's really skilled on the clinical and regulatory side, and just I would say, a great ambassador of what you want in a partner. Even with Monford, his dad died of lower leg ischemic disease, starting with a toe amputation, then half the foot, then, up the leg. And really, it's a horrible thing to watch. And we think that we have a real opportunity to do things in the peripheral vascular space below the knee. We've used the devices in a number of different areas, in various models, to ensure that it really works effectively. We feel very comfortable about that. But I'll give you an idea. Like, You have to have control of the degradation profile in a way that allows you to match it against the disease state. So for lower leg ischemia, one of the routine treatment options is drug-eluting balloons. Drug-eluting balloons routinely, because the vessels are heavily calcified, very small if you can actually cross the vessels half the time, that when you dilate those balloons up to deliver the drug, you end up with dissections. So if you end up with a grade 3 dissection, a grade 4 dissection, those are perfect areas to stent normally, you think, right? But the problem is if you stent them with a long-lasting material, companies out right now that are stenting these devices with metal stents. Now everyone's moved away from metal. So then they move to now biodegradable stents. Sounds like a great idea, but if your biodegradable stent lasts 2 to 3 years, right? That doesn't work, right? Because you're not matching it to that disease state. So we believe that this is really where the core capabilities in our business lie, and that we have the ability to manage the degradation profile of these various devices, be it polymer materials or alloy-based materials. And we think that this is a perfect application for where we're headed, and that gives you these great opportunities for stenting mesenteric vessels, visceral, iliacs, etc.
Wow, that
And then
sounds
we're done.
extremely excited. Oh, it doesn't sound like you're going to be done for a long time. That is amazing. I think if you can figure out a way of having men not to have a catheter after prostate surgery, you'd probably be Times Man of the Year. I'm serious. That would be very, very popular among doctors and patients and everybody. Now, you've built several companies, and I'm curious, what are some of the building blocks that make a company successful and able to compete in what sounds to me like a very competitive market that you're in?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is process. Let's put aside the passion and the want to, because that's something you can't really teach. That's a given. When you get into these things, that's simply a given. So it's more process related. Are you capable of constantly putting process in place and then building processes going forward that are scalable? It's as simple as that as we think about this, and that's the critical piece when we think around building a company. Like, what are you really doing to implement in terms of process change that allows you to get to the growth that you need to get to, or to manage the risks that you need to manage depending on the stage of the business?
Yeah, I can see that. There's a lot of different issues and people that are involved with multi uh, process kind of company like you're into. I can't. It's hard for me to imagine the amount of anatomy and physiology and medicine that you have to know in order to attack these issues. It's really very impressive.
Elliot, I always say that me personally, I'm a B player in pretty much everything I do. I've never been exceptional at anything. And so what it gives me the advantage of is it gives me the advantage of having to hire people that are exceptional. And I think that that's the biggest advantage. Now, whether I hire the wrong person to do nothing about it, that's something totally different, because I'm the internal optimist. I believe that ultimately you can get people to a position where they exceed their own expectations. Right, and so we tend to put a lot of emphasis on people doing way more than they expect that they have the real opportunity to do or to accomplish.
Yeah, I found, as a leader, the important thing is to get the right people on the bus and try to put them in the right seats to align them with their strengths. And that, definitely, of course, the leader has to determine what direction the bus is going in. But getting the right people is definitely a very important piece of that. I'm wondering if you have anything else you want to share with our audience today.
I don't really. I think that the biggest thing I'd love to share is that, we love problems. We're one of the very few companies in the world that love to talk about problems. Anytime doctors have problems, I have a doctor, Paul Yaton, coming to visit me next week, right, over the weekend, just to talk about problems, for example, with gallbladder drainage, right? you know, Everybody has an idea of a problem, identify the problem. There's a million gallbladders like that are removed each year in the US. There's a host of complications, a host of problems surrounding them. So I think that there's way more opportunities to execute on different devices or solutions than my lifetime, will last. But this is the biggest thing, is like you have to eat as much as possible when I mean about these problems, because if you don't, nobody else is going to. And like when we really talk about all this stuff, I mentioned my aneurysm. right? Some doctors saved me. And when I talk to different doctors, I tell them the same thing. I go, you don't know who you're saving because you guys do it as a production process. It's like, these people go in and out of your lives. You have no idea. And then you end up with somebody like me who really constantly is reflecting on that Dr. Drake that saved my life when I was a young kid, right? Here I am still, I'm 60, I'm still playing rugby, I'm still out having beers with the boys, right? I got a lovely wife, I got 2 great kids, and I got that guy to thank for it.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. These things we need to spend more time reflecting on how lovely life is and what great thing life gives us versus the little things in life that we think are so horrible.
Well, that's a good place to end on, I think. Thank you, Eric Mangiardi. This has been a very informative and enlightening conversation. I learned a great deal today. It gives me a lot of confidence that there's people out like you that are out there working on these problems. You identify a problem, you go after it, you come up with a novel solution, and it helps a lot of people. So we really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you, Elliot. Thanks for letting us participate. And when you think about an emerging med tech company, think of Q3 Medical. Hopefully, you'll hear more about the name.
I bet we will. Thanks so much, Eric. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
The preceding podcast contained discussions of medical cases where names and identifying details were altered to protect the privacy of individuals. The views and opinions expressed were those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated institutions or organizations. This podcast was for entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice.